The most important thing for going deeper with people is curiosity. Find something that you're actually curious about and ask them questions, because people love it when you are curious about them. They love to know that you want to know more. And so if you can find something you're genuinely curious about, ask them about it. The other thing is to stay away from small talk type conversations and questions. Ask open-ended questions, not closed questions. A closed question has a binary answer, yes or no. Instead, ask a question that invites a longer response, that does not have just a yes or no answer. Don't ask things that are very, very typical. Instead of how are you doing, maybe you ask, what's something you're really caring about these days? Or what's something that's on your heart or your mind right now? Try to take the questions a little deeper, a little more to the heart, a little more to the emotions, a little more to what's really true. Those are the three things you can do on questions in order to have the conversation go deeper. And the other thing is you can show a little bit of vulnerability. Say something that's really true to your heart. Share something that is maybe not something that you'd share in an everyday conversation. Something that feels really important to you or is a little bit of a risk. This is one of the most common things I get asked as a speaking coach. What do I do about the fact that I am nervous? People are nervous about being nervous. Speaking skills and speaking in front of people is one of the things that frightens people the most, more than anything else. And so asking the question of what do I do if I'm nervous? When I'm nervous, I'm really particularly vulnerable to collapsing or to not being able to say what I want or have the impact that I want. So super, super common. So if you find that your mind is racing faster than your mouth can keep up, which is especially common for those of us like me who have ADHD-like brains, super, super common, the most powerful skill set you can build, the most powerful technique you can use is pause. Whenever I tell people to work on the skill set of pause, they push back. It feels so uncomfortable. It doesn't feel natural. I feel like I'm going to be interrupted by someone else. All kinds of reasons. If we pause in a way where we also breathe, it helps regulate our nervous system. It helps calm us down. It helps us reconnect to ourselves. Pausing also gives us an opportunity to think about which of the many thoughts that are in our mind need to be grabbed onto and shared. Pausing is also an opportunity for the person you are speaking with to interact. Sometimes if you feel disinclined to pause because you want to keep control of the floor, so to speak, it can feel a little bit like you're barraging the person you're speaking with. If you see this happening in your life where your mind is going and your mouth is doing its best to keep up, you're probably really excited. You probably have a lot of passion about the topic you're sharing. You probably have a lot to give on that topic. And so honor that in yourself. Oh, I'm so excited right now. You can even name it. I'm so excited right now. My mouth is having a hard time keeping up with my brain. Let me just take a breath. And let me think about what's the most important thing I want to share with you. And honor the fact that you're a person with enthusiasm and excitement and passion and ideas to share. Another thing you can do to slow yourself down is to articulate. Use your mouth and your tongue and the way you speak in a way that brings more precision to the words you are sharing. In my experience as a speaking coach, almost everyone could benefit from more precise articulation. Most of us tend to blur our words together or mumble or simply not be clear and precise with our speaking. And if we pay attention, and I'm going to exaggerate it now a little bit, to all of the muscles in our mouth and our face contributing to precision of the words we are speaking, we will, first of all, be more understood by listeners, but also it will slow us down. It will slow you down to the speed you need to be. The key piece in this question is a lack of listening. Listening is not easy. We're not taught to be listeners. The skill set that my teacher, Casey Baker, talks about is called fertile listening. when you listen to another person in a way that the best of them can't help but show up, you listen in a way that they can't help but bloom in your presence. So in a way, it's a version of active listening, where you listen to someone in a way that is saying to them, yes, more, I understand. Oh, how interesting. Say more. So that through the way you are responding to them emotionally, physically, visually, with your facial expression, you have a subtext happening, and the subtext is being in conversation with them. So sometimes I say that speaking is really listening and listening is really speaking. You can't separate them. And when you listen to someone in that way, they feel so heard, and it creates so much rapport between you and that other person. So I think in answer to this question, it probably almost always starts with being a more effective listener, active listening, fertile listening, and responsive listening. And then on the side of the talking too much part, I would say it's different skill sets. And some of the things that I teach around an antidote to talking too much are trust that you don't have to say everything. And this is especially true for those of us who have a lot of ideas, who have so much to share, who want to give it all. Sometimes the important thing is to say 50%. Say 50% of what there is right there on the surface for you to share, and trust that the other 50% is going to come up and be invited in on its own time. Another practical technique for not saying too much is to understand the difference between speaking in the feminine and speaking in the masculine. Speaking in the feminine is when you speak out loud and you think and you explore one idea, and then maybe you give the opposite, you give the caveat. And it's what I used to call speaking like a blah, 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 or some people call it verbal diarrhea. But the truth is there's a lot of power and creativity and connection and discovery in speaking in the feminine. But if you want to do it effectively, you have to put some kind of masculine wrapper around it. That means you have to name it and say, can I speak on this topic for 2 minutes right now? Can you listen to me speaking in the feminine? Or can you listen while I verbally process this concept so I can figure out what I think about it? Then you've wrapped a masculine container around the process and the practice of speaking in the feminine in a way that holds it beautifully. If you don't do that and you're not conscious of speaking in the feminine, then what happens often is the feeling of, I just said too much, I went on, I didn't really say anything, and it can feel really terrible for the person speaking. And it can also feel very overwhelming for the person listening. So if you can consciously, knowingly speak in the feminine as a practice for discovery and learning and creativity and self-expression, with consciousness and with a container, super powerful. Another way you can practice not saying too much is speaking in the masculine. When you consider all of the things that you've discovered through speaking in the feminine, or just from sitting with your own thoughts, and you pick the essence and the pith out from that topic, you deliver it directly, consciously, clearly, and then you land the period to say, this thought is complete. A lot of times when I'm on Zoom, the people that are in the room might not all be on camera. If they're not on camera, it's very difficult to read people. So always encourage people to come onto camera, because it is so much better for creating rapport and connection. And so invite people to show up on camera, messaged along the lines of, I really want to be able to see you and connect with you wherever possible. If you can have a conversation with people on camera, it's going to be more effective. I started coaching 20 years ago. And at the time when I started coaching, we did almost all of our coaching through phone. There was not Zoom and video conferencing then. And one thing I discovered then is that you can tell so much about people by just hearing their voice. I would say the same thing is true on Zoom. You can create very deep connections on Zoom. And here I'm going to tell you a little story about that. I was a film and television actor for many years until I had my first child. And the brain cannot make a distinction between in-person, three-dimensional connection and two-dimensional connections. It can't tell the difference. It does not know. So the reason I know this, I was on a set when I was a film and television actor, and it was a set that I was a regular character on. And I was talking to this other actor, and I was like, oh yeah, well, you were here yesterday, and you know that blah, blah, blah. You remember yesterday, da, 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 da. And he was like, no, I wasn't here yesterday. And I was like, that is so weird and so crazy, because I have such a distinct memory of you being here yesterday. And he said, no, I wasn't here yesterday. No, I wasn't. I definitely wasn't here. I said, are you sure? Because I could swear, I just have such a strong memory of you being here. He swore up and down that he had not been on set. And I could not figure it out because it was so clear in my mind. And then I realized that the night before, I had been watching a TV show that he was on. And so I had seen him the day before, in fact, but it was not on set with me. It was on a TV show on the television. And the difference between my brain's ability to conceive that version of him that was on the TV and the version of him that was in real life, in person, in 3D, was exactly zero. There was no difference to my brain. All that to say that I am absolutely 100% clear that with intention and by some of the things we've already talked about, asking deepening questions, asking open-ended questions, fertile listening, and being responsive about how we communicate. And then one more thing I haven't said yet, and that is eye contact. Eye contact on a virtual screen is as important as it is in real life. When you're on Zoom, you need to make sure that the picture of the person you are talking to is in an appropriate place so that they experience you to be looking at the camera. So for example, right now, I am looking at the camera. Hopefully you feel like I am looking right at you. But if I'm talking to someone with a picture that I've got at the bottom of my screen and I'm talking to them, looking at them like this, then even though I can see their face because that's where their picture is, they're not going to have the experience that I'm connecting with them here. And so that's a pro tip. So all of those things together, I'm going to make the case that we can create deep connections on Zoom, virtually. I think this is so common and honestly damaging. It's damaging to the relationship ultimately. Like at some point, it's going to come back and haunt that relationship. And you are also missing an opportunity to go deeper and to create more connection with people. I have the really strong belief that communication and connection and vulnerability and authenticity are the building blocks for deep relationship. And they're also the opportunity for personal growth. How do we be true and fully expressed as ourselves in relationship to the people who matter most in our lives? Most of us were not taught the skills that we need to have tough talks in ways that deepen relationship. So there are skills that we can learn. One is imago dialogue and the other one is nonviolent communication, or NVC. And the key points to those type of communication systems is when you bring up the circumstance or the event that happened or the difficult situation in a way that names the thing that happened, and then there's the meaning we make of it. And if we can separate those things and say, this is the thing that happened, and here's how I feel about it, because the story that I'm making up in my mind is blah, blah, blah. And here's the request that I have. That's a basic imago and nonviolent communication practice put together. And in some ways, that's a way to share what's true and real without all the associative meanings that we make of it that are usually the things that trigger people. There's also the fact that sometimes we have something to share with someone that's not necessarily what they want to hear. Okay, I have a lot of thoughts on this one. The first place I start on this one is I am not a hard and fast believer in the very popular concept that constructive criticism, constructive feedback, areas for growth, areas for improvement, ways that we could be better are always useful. I'm in a lot of communities where people believe that the only way you grow is by having trusted people tell you what they think you should do better. And I'm not 100% believer in the fact that constructive criticism is always useful. I kind of sometimes don't think it is. I believe that for the most part, many of us are so constructively critical to ourselves that we don't need another person's opinion contributing to our self-doubt. Sometimes simply starting with and paying attention to the things that work well can be a place from where we can expand into getting better, getting more, expanding our range. So I tend to default to that as the best starting point. If someone really wants your feedback on how they could do better, then I think that contextualizing it around what's an opportunity for improvement. So first of all, get consent, contextualize it as a way to improve or to grow. There's almost nothing that can't be contextualized in a way that has a positive spin. So always be sensitive to positive spin. And then make sure you sandwich it. You give 1-1 ratio of positive to constructive criticism, it'll feel really critical to people. If you give 7 positive strokes to 1 request for change, it might feel equal. So first of all, question whether constructive criticism or feedback for growth is actually useful. And if you know for sure that it is and it's welcome, make sure that you have consent. Make sure you use a positive frame for it and sandwich it between other positive things. Let's talk about masculine, feminine, romantic, and sexual partnerships. I think you have to take the time and you have to be willing to make the shift, especially in our world right now. We are very depolarized in our relationships between men and women. Women have had to really develop their masculine side in order to be effective in the world, to be successful, to have careers, to protect themselves, to raise children. And so our masculine is very developed for most of us in Western culture in modern times. And for many men, especially men who are good people, who want to be good partners, a lot of times they're so nervous about being assholes or being people that are going to cause harm that sometimes they can pull back their directive masculine energy and then in some ways be a little bit feminized. And so in a lot of ways we're depolarized. And some of the practice for us to get out of our habitual patterns and out of our daily autopilots, out of the daily grind of making a living, taking care of kids, and actually find a way to connect intimately has to do with deepening, reconnecting with that side of our essence that is conducive to intimacy and to connection and to sexuality and chemistry. And so sometimes taking the actual time, maybe learning some skills. It might mean doing a ritual of recognizing, okay, I'm stepping through the door from my career, from my job, from my work, and now I'm going to shift into a gear that has more to do with how I'm going to connect with my partner. It might mean taking on some practices around breath and connection. It might mean creating rituals together where you say, whenever we see each other, we're going to hold each other's hands and look into each other's eyes and take 3 breaths together to see this other human who is in front of me, who I love. So building rituals like that. Yeah, those are just a couple things that come to mind. It's a really good question, and maybe I'll do a whole video on this because I think there's lots of other ways that we can work towards prioritizing our intimate connection with partners, with our loved ones, with lovers, with people that we care about, and that we have romantic relationships with.